You've done this before too. Aloha. Welcome to Now What with State Representative Cindy Evans. Hi, I'm Cindy Evans, and it's my pleasure to be with you today and talk about legalizing gambling. Are you for it? Are you not for it? I think it's worthy of discussion, and I'm a state policymaker here in the State House of Representatives in Hawaii, and that's one of the topics that we've been talking about this session. And for those of you who don't know, is we're having a lot of trouble with our economy, slowing economy, and so some people think this is a great idea for raising revenues and bringing money to the state. And so it's very controversial, and I think you're going to find today's show really interesting because I have a really great person with us today who has a lot of background, a lot of history, is very well educated, and as a matter of fact, we have something very well in common. We're both connected to Champaign, Illinois, where the University of Illinois is at, and so we'll talk a little bit about that so you get to know a little bit more about us personally. So having said that, let's get started. So with me today is Jon Kindt, and good to see you.
Glad to be with you, Representative. Thank you for having me. And thanks for bringing me out from Illinois, where when I left it was 3 degrees below zero. I am very much enjoying your weather.
All right. Thank you. I hope you've had an opportunity to go to the beaches.
Unfortunately not. You all have kept me pretty busy here informing the legislature on these types of issues, and it's been a whole lot of fun, and I appreciate your courtesy in having me here today.
All right. Thank you. I first want to talk briefly about all of these. Your credentials are amazing. On his card that I have here, it says MBA, JD, LLM, and SJD. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, that's a good question. After I got the third graduate degree, my father said we're giving him the third degree. And but I got another one after that, and they're just in basically law and business. And you're embarrassing me now. I'm like, what do I say now? It's like nobody ever pays any attention to that. My students certainly don't. My boss certainly doesn't. So, but I guess what I would assure people is that we've done a lot of academic research on these issues. It's very rigorous, and so we're here today to give you the solid academics and. That's academia, kind of like in macadamia nuts. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, my wife keeps. Yeah, my wife keeps saying that's so funny. I tried that joke yesterday. They didn't laugh either. So.
Thank you for the humor. This is great. This is great. So, on a serious note, though, people have a lot of concerns about gambling and how it may change the social environment of a community. There's a lot of discussion about social costs. So,
right.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work and how you maybe have shown that there is these unintended consequences and a lot of costs?
Sure. I mean, you've had some experience with Illinois. Perhaps you remember our former U.S. Senator, Senator Paul Simon, a liberal senator, Democrat liberal from Illinois. He got together with a Republican senator, Richard Lugar of Indiana, and they formed the National Gambling Impact Study Commission, which we call the Blue Report. It's got a nice blue cover on it, and it basically said, it confirmed everything us academics had been saying. It said there should be a moratorium, a prohibition on the expansion of any type of gambling anywhere in the United States. It called for the recriminalization of slot machines convenient to the public. It also called for the criminalization of sports gambling. It's only legal in Nevada, but they said we shouldn't have any legalized sports gambling. We shouldn't have this predatory type of gambling. It called for stricter enforcements on internet gambling. It's already illegal to gamble on the internet, but they called for stricter enforcement, and in 2006 we passed what's called the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, and I was privileged to testify before Congress in favor of that act. It passed with 80% of the Congress voting in for it, totally bipartisan, and we had like 10 years worth of discussions on that. And you know what? Only 2 years later, the lobbying industry is coming back with a $100 million campaign trying to repeal that legislation. Now, one thing we ought to ask is, where's that $100 million in lobbying money coming from if this is an illegal activity, and it has been since Bobby Kennedy passed the Wire Act in 1961?
Whoa.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, I know
Yeah.
this is pretty heavy stuff, but
Yeah.
this was what the commission held. And the other thing I probably would want to point out is we've done kind of raised the red flag on gambling with crime. And there's a new report, fairly recent report, out of Harvard and MIT. And it basically says that once you bring in these slot machines, and we're talking slot machines here, because that's what really the gambling people make 90% of their money off of the slot machines. And this new recent Harvard MIT report, conducted over about a 10-year period, concluded that before and after you bring in the slots, after you bring in casino gambling, the crime rate goes up 10% and then continues up after that. And so you have these very large social costs. And I think that's one reason why the National Gambling Commission said, hey, really think about this. And I guess my concern for Hawaii is, don't make the mistakes Illinois has made on this. And because contrary to the National Gambling Report, the proposals that some people are making here, and I think they're coming from outside the state primarily, are coming in to say, we want slot machines. Well, that's exactly what the National Commission said. Slot machines convenient to the public should be recriminalized. Now, they didn't quite say recriminalize, they said cease and roll back existing operations. But basically they were saying recriminalize.
Okay. Well, I know that you brought some slides today to kind of educate us on kind of some of more information about this, because obviously for any of us to make a decision, we want to be educated, understand, get the information. So we'll share that with everyone. But here's the first slide. Actually.
Well, yeah, this is a great slide. This is from just a short report, and it talks about the biggest tourism economies in the United States. It talks about New Orleans, but it also talks about Florida in particular, which has this huge tourist economy and is somewhat parallel to the Hawaii tourist economy. And basically, I remember going down there in 1994 at the invitation of Governor Lawton Chiles, who was then running against gubernatorial candidate Jeb Bush, who later on, of course, became governor. And they were both adamantly against the casinos coming to Florida. And by the way, through sort of a nefarious way, the pro-gambling interests had gotten this onto a statewide ballot by passing around petitions, and there was a lot of scandal involving that. But it did get on the ballot. And they were against it. The Florida Department of Commerce came out with a blistering report saying that Florida did not need casinos, casinos needed Florida, and they would, quote unquote, cannibalize the pre-existing tourism economy. That's a pretty strong word for the Department of Commerce. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement said that it would bring crime, and they, in concert with the sheriffs and other law enforcement agencies, unanimously voted against the casinos coming to Florida. Well, basically, and there was also a very good economic report, one of the first comprehensive reports to come out, which helped inspire the later U.S. National Gambling Impact Study Commission federal report. And they were all quite negative on this. And so the problem is, or I guess, and I should say that my colleagues and I, several of my colleagues and I, don't take any honorarium or consultant fees for doing this. We just don't want other states to make the mistakes that Illinois has made with this.
Well, can I
Sure.
stop for a moment? You know, having grown up in Illinois, I remember as a little girl going with my grandma to the churches in Illinois. Always had chicken fries, and it was just a big deal. All summer long on Sunday afternoons, there would be these, you know, chicken barbecues, and afterwards you would go play bingo. And I think some people see bingo as gambling, or maybe even think about bingo as a forerunner to other types of gambling. For
Right.
example, there's always the discussion, marijuana is a gateway drug to harder drugs. Well, is bingo, is that a gateway to people wanting more gambling. What's your take on the bingo and the lighter,
Yeah.
maybe more social?
Yeah, people are always going to play these games. They're always going to gamble a little bit. We're talking about state-sponsored gambling here, and we're talking about an industry which has literally tried to throw open the door to slot machines. And slot machines are 90% of the gambling money in this country, basically. Even the lotteries are going to slot-type machines because it's the faster that you can gamble. That's what it's all about. It's the speed of the gambling. We're not talking about charitable gambling. But the problem with the charitable gambling is once you open the door to the charitable gambling, then the courts have said, hey, you've probably let the camel's nose under the tent, and you probably are going to have to allow other forms of gambling. So there's quite a controversy there once you allow the charitable gambling. But, everybody says, but the charitable gambling is like, once a year, once a month, and who cares? But it opens the door, unfortunately, and it compromises the moral, ethical opposition to the really hard forms of gambling. And the National Commission calls the slot machines the crack cocaine of creating new addicted gamblers. So you're perfectly correct when you talk about kind of the marijuana, and then we get into the harder forms of gambling. It's all about the speed of the gambling. The faster you can gamble, the faster they get your money. And we're talking about state-sponsored.
So should we, this internet gambling then must be like this next generation of gambling that is even more dangerous than slot machines.
You are absolutely right. And that's, Bobby Kennedy, to put controls on organized crime, helped pass the Wire Act in 1961. And the FBI's interpretation on that is that gambling on the internet is illegal under the Wire Act. That's been their interpretation since day one. But the National Commission recommended even stronger prohibitions given the new technologies, and that's why we passed in 2006 and signed into law the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, which gives more enforcement powers to banks and credit establishments to restrict this type of gambling. But you are absolutely right. When you have internet gambling, you have the crack cocaine, the worst form of gambling, in every living room, at every work desk, and at every school desk. And you can't monitor kids doing this. I'll take polls in my class among college students, and I'll say, how many of you know about gambling on the internet, and how many of you know that it's illegal? And it's maybe 10% of the class, huge classes, will know that it's illegal. And so you've got a multi-billion-dollar industry out there with a huge amount of PR dollars, which can literally overwhelm what I'm saying here today, and overwhelm the academics, and even overwhelm the Federal Commission. They actually, I've seen editorials from the lobbyists that say, well, the National Gambling Impact Study Commission was in favor of gambling. That is totally incorrect. That's a total, and if you just call up the former director of the commission, Tim Kelly, Professor Tim Kelly, he'll tell you that he is outraged by the way that the lobbyists are spinning the National Commission report, saying that it actually favors gambling.
Wow.
It's a lot to digest.
It's a lot to digest,
Yeah.
but what's coming to mind for me right now is across the United States, what's happened in the last 10 years? What has been the trend? How much has this gambling grown, or have we really boxed it in and kept some controls on it? Can you give us a little bit of sense of?
Great question.
Yeah.
Back in the 1990s, gambling really started to spread here. Excuse me. And in South Carolina is a great example. They had a little loophole in their legislation involving the lottery, by the way. And in that loophole, they slipped in thousands of slot machines all across the state. Governor David Beasley, South Carolina Governor David Beasley, said this is wrong. He basically recriminalized. It was a huge fight, scandal after scandal, and he recriminalized it. They threw all these slot machines out. Their economy took off, by the way, because the consumer dollars from gambling were now going into consumer products.